Professor Krell arrived at the observation station on a cold morning in late autumn. His crystalline body reflected the pale sunlight streaming through the wide windows, casting violet patterns across the metal floor. He had traveled from his home planet 17 light-years away, and he was tired. The assignment seemed simple enough: observe a young human specimen and test her cognitive abilities. It was routine work, something he had done hundreds of times before with other species across the galaxy. The research center was small and quiet. Only a handful of assistants moved through the corridors, preparing the observation chamber for the testing session. Krell reviewed the files on his data pad as he walked. The human species was classified as developing. Their brains were smaller than most sentient races. Their processing speed was average at best. Their memory retention was poor. Everything in the records suggested they were limited, capable but not exceptional. Krell had tested members of species far more advanced than humans. This would be straightforward. 3 hours, perhaps 4 if the child was unusually gifted. He estimated she would solve 2, maybe 3 of his prepared puzzles. The girl arrived at precisely 9 in the morning. Her name was Emma, and she was only 10 years old. She was small even by human standards, barely reaching up to Krell's shoulder. She wore a simple blue dress and had her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. When she entered the observation chamber, her eyes moved everywhere at once, taking in every detail of the strange alien technology, the unusual furniture, the walls that seemed to glow softly from within. "Hello," Emma said, her voice clear and curious. "Are you the alien professor? You look really cool." Krell made a sound that approximated a human greeting. He was not accustomed to small talk. "You may sit here," he said, gesturing toward a comfortable chair positioned in front of a large haptic interface. The screen displayed a complex three-dimensional puzzle. "I will present you with problems to solve. Your task is to find the solution as quickly as possible. There is no penalty for taking time. Work at your own pace." Emma nodded and sat down. She looked at the first puzzle displayed on the screen. It was a spatial reasoning test of considerable difficulty. The puzzle showed a 4-dimensional object, but only its 3-dimensional projection was visible. The goal was to mentally rotate the object in 4-dimensional space and identify which of 5 possible answers showed the correct configuration. This problem was designed to take most humans between 20 and 30 minutes to complete. Krell set the timer and watched. Emma studied the image for perhaps 5 seconds. Then her small fingers moved across the haptic interface. She rotated the image, examined it from different angles, and made several quick adjustments. Her dark eyes focused intently on the screen. Krell watched the timer count upward. 5 seconds. 6 seconds. 7 seconds. 8 seconds. Emma pressed the final answer button. The system chimed. The answer was correct. Krell's bioluminescent bands, the glowing stripes that ran along his crystalline body and expressed his emotions, flickered suddenly from a calm blue to a confused violet. He checked his instruments. Perhaps the interface was malfunctioning. Perhaps the puzzle had not been calibrated correctly. He ran a diagnostic. Everything appeared normal. The puzzle was legitimate. The answer was indeed correct. And the time was 8 seconds. This was impossible. "What would you like me to do next?" Emma asked, already looking at him expectantly. Krell paused. He had been prepared for this assignment to be routine, even boring. Instead, something unusual was happening. He decided to test his hypothesis. He configured the second puzzle, something more challenging. This was a probability matrix problem that required understanding of abstract game theory and statistical analysis. The puzzle contained 17 different variables, each one affecting the outcome in subtle and complex ways. Most humans would require 3 hours to complete it. Krell's own doctoral students, all members of highly advanced species, typically needed at least 1 hour. Emma began immediately. She examined the puzzle, her eyes scanning back and forth across the information displayed on the screen. Her small hands moved confidently across the interface. She seemed to be seeing something that Krell could not quite perceive. After 43 seconds, she pressed the completion button. The system chimed again. The answer was perfect. Krell's bands flashed even more intensely. Something was definitely wrong, or something was definitely very interesting. He was not sure which one troubled him more. "The puzzles are getting harder one by one," Emma said, turning to look at Krell directly. "But shouldn't they get harder in other ways too? Like, shouldn't you be making them harder at the same time in multiple directions? That way they would actually be more challenging." Krell stood very still. Emma had not only solved the puzzle in impossible time, but she had also identified a flaw in his testing methodology. She had provided metacognitive analysis of his own experimental design. This was not something Krell encountered often, even among senior researchers from advanced civilizations. "You are correct," Krell said slowly. "Your observation is valid." Emma smiled. "So can we try some really hard ones now? These are kind of easy." Krell felt something shift in his chest, something that his species rarely experienced. It was the beginning of profound intellectual confusion, mixed with something that might have been excitement. He had come to this small observation station on Earth expecting routine work. He had expected to catalog the cognitive abilities of another developing species and file a standard report with the Galactic Archive. Instead, a 10-year-old human girl had solved problems in seconds that should have required minutes or hours. She had offered valid criticism of his experimental design. She was now asking for more challenging puzzles with genuine enthusiasm and confidence. Krell recalibrated his instruments. He loaded the third puzzle into the system, something significantly more complex. This puzzle incorporated elements of relativistic physics, abstract mathematical theory, and intuitive reasoning all combined together. Emma began working immediately, her young face alive with focus and genuine joy. Krell watched, his violet bands glowing softly, and wondered what he was about to discover. Professor Krell abandoned all pretense of following standard testing protocol. He had moved beyond routine observation and entered territory that no amount of preparation could have readied him for. Over the next 2 hours he fed puzzle after puzzle into the haptic interface, each one progressively more complex than the last. Each puzzle was designed to test different aspects of advanced cognition: spatial reasoning, abstract logic, pattern recognition, probability analysis, and theoretical mathematics. Emma solved every single one. More remarkably, she solved them faster than any being Krell had ever tested. A puzzle that should have required an hour took her 4 minutes. A problem that would normally demand several hours of concentrated effort from doctoral candidates across multiple advanced species took her 12 minutes. She moved through the challenges with increasing enthusiasm, her small body leaning forward on the chair, her dark eyes bright with genuine excitement. When she completed a particularly elegant theoretical puzzle involving harmonic resonance patterns, Emma actually laughed out loud. The sound was surprising and joyful, creating small harmonic vibrations that Krell's sensory organs could detect. She bounced slightly in her chair, clearly delighted by the experience of solving something difficult. "That one was really fun," she exclaimed, looking up at Krell with a grin. "Can I try the really hard ones now? The ones that maybe nobody has solved before?" Krell's bioluminescent bands had shifted to a deep orange color, which in his species indicated profound uncertainty and concern. He was beginning to wonder if he truly understood anything about human cognition at all. Everything in the archive's database contradicted what he was witnessing with his own sensory equipment. He decided to take a different approach. Instead of presenting prepared puzzles, he selected a theoretical problem that he himself had been working on for several months. It was a complex mathematical framework dealing with dimensional boundaries and how they might interact with harmonic frequencies. Even Krell, with his centuries of education and experience, had not yet solved it completely. The problem existed at the very edge of known theoretical mathematics. Emma examined the problem for approximately 90 seconds. She asked Krell 3 clarifying questions about the parameters and the assumptions underlying the puzzle. Then she began working. Her fingers moved across the interface with surprising speed and precision. She sketched out equations, created visual models, and seemed to be testing various approaches simultaneously in her mind. After 19 minutes, Emma pressed the completion button. The system analyzed her work. After several seconds, it chimed. The solution was not only correct but it was elegant. It was, in fact, a solution that Krell himself had been pursuing but had not yet discovered. This young human girl had solved a problem that had occupied a trained alien researcher for months. Krell felt something very much like shock move through his crystalline structure. His bands flashed through several colors rapidly, cycling from orange to purple to blue and back again. "I think that was the hardest one yet," Emma said, breathing slightly harder than before. She seemed satisfied but also energized rather than tired. "That one was actually interesting. The others were pretty easy once you figured out what they were asking." At that moment, a tall human man entered the observation chamber. His name was Holt and he was a senior researcher from the Galactic Archive. He had been sent to verify Krell's initial reports, which Krell had submitted in barely coherent form earlier that morning. Holt was skeptical. The reports seemed exaggerated. The claims about the young human's solving speed seemed impossible. Surely there had been an error in measurement or calibration. Holt observed silently for the next 2 hours as Emma worked through increasingly difficult challenges. Krell presented problems from multiple scientific disciplines, each one more complex than the last. Emma attacked each puzzle with focused determination and genuine enjoyment. She solved problems involving quantum mechanics, abstract topology, non-Euclidean geometry, and theoretical physics applications. Some took her several minutes. Some she completed in under a minute. Some she solved while also conversing casually with the researchers or asking clarifying questions about the underlying assumptions. Finally, after Emma had solved a particularly difficult problem involving multidimensional calculus in just over 6 minutes, Holt leaned toward Krell and spoke in a low voice. "This should not be possible," Holt said quietly, his own sensory organs indicating confusion and concern. "I do not understand what I am observing." Emma looked up from the interface and heard this comment. She turned to face both researchers directly, her young face thoughtful and serious. "Why not?" she asked simply. "Puzzles just have a way they want to be solved. I just find it's like, the answer is already there in the puzzle, you know? It's just hiding. You just have to see where it wants to go." Holt and Krell exchanged looks. Emma had described a fundamentally different approach to problem solving than what either of their training had prepared them to understand. She was not calculating solutions through systematic logical progression. She was not applying learned formulas or established protocols. Instead, she seemed to be perceiving the solutions intuitively, as though the answer existed in some space that only her mind could access. "That is not how advanced problem-solving typically works," Holt said to Emma carefully. "Most sentient beings must follow logical steps. They must build understanding from component parts." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, I know. My teacher says that some people think like computers. They're really good at following steps. But I think different. I don't know how to explain it better. The answer is just, there. I see it." Over the next several hours, Krell and Holt tested this theory repeatedly. They presented puzzles in various formats and from various disciplines. In every case, Emma seemed to perceive the solutions in ways that defied conventional understanding. She made intuitive leaps that logic alone could not justify. She saw patterns and connections that should have required methodical analysis but instead appeared to her almost instantaneously. By the time the testing session finally ended late in the afternoon, both Krell and Holt had reached the same conclusion. The human girl was not simply intelligent. She possessed a fundamentally different type of cognition, one that the archive had never properly documented or understood. As Emma was preparing to leave, she turned to Krell and smiled. "Thank you for the interesting puzzles," she said. "That was really fun. Can I come back and do this again?" Krell's bands glowed a soft, warm yellow, a color that indicated wonder and fascination. "Yes," he said quietly. "I believe you should." Professor Krell spent the entire night in the research station's database archives, searching through centuries of accumulated knowledge about human cognition. The lights in his private quarters remained on while he worked, his crystalline body glowing softly in the darkness of the facility around him. He had access to everything the Galactic Archive had ever recorded about the human species, and he was determined to find an explanation for what he had witnessed. What he discovered was deeply frustrating. The archive's classification of humans was remarkably consistent across all sources. Humans were catalogued as a developing species. Their individual processing speed was adequate but not exceptional. Their short-term memory was limited. Their attention spans were notoriously poor. Their cognitive architecture was described as linear and sequential, meaning they typically solved problems one step at a time, building understanding through logical progression. By every standard measurement, humans ranked somewhere in the middle range of intelligent species. They were capable of remarkable achievements, certainly, but they were not considered exceptionally gifted in any particular cognitive domain. Yet Emma existed. Emma contradicted every single one of these baseline assumptions. Emma solved problems in seconds that should have required hours. Emma made intuitive leaps that defied logical explanation. Emma perceived solutions in ways that seemed almost impossible. Krell expanded his search parameters. He looked for outliers, for exceptional humans, for any records of individuals who displayed cognitive abilities similar to Emma's. What he found was surprising. Such individuals did exist, though they were rare. The archive had documented perhaps 200 humans across its entire history who displayed exceptional problem-solving abilities or unusual cognitive patterns. Some were mathematicians. Some were artists. Some were engineers or scientists. Their abilities varied widely, but they shared one characteristic. They all seemed to perceive problems differently than other individuals from their species. Krell cross-referenced this data with biological information. He requested complete neural scans of Emma from the medical team at the research station. The scans took several hours to complete, and Emma proved to be remarkably patient throughout the process, even though the scanning technology was uncomfortable and somewhat unpleasant for her. When the results came back, Krell examined them with intense focus. What the scans revealed was extraordinary. Emma's brain showed simultaneous activation across multiple regions that were typically used sequentially in other species. Areas associated with logical analysis were active at the same time as areas associated with intuitive creativity. Memory storage regions were firing in synchronization with pattern recognition zones. Her neural activity looked almost chaotic compared to what Krell was accustomed to seeing in more orderly species. But this chaos, Krell began to understand, was not a flaw. It was an advantage. Krell called Holt and several other researchers to examine the neural scans with him. They spent hours analyzing the data, comparing Emma's brain activity to other humans, other species, and theoretical models of cognition. The consensus that emerged was startling. Emma was not thinking faster than other beings. She was thinking differently. Her brain was structured in a way that allowed multiple cognitive processes to operate simultaneously, creating neural pathways that could bridge intuitive and logical thinking in ways most other species could not achieve. "This is remarkable," Holt said, studying the three-dimensional visualization of Emma's neural activity. "If humans possess this capability naturally, why are they classified as only moderately intelligent?" Krell considered this question carefully. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "because we have been measuring intelligence using criteria that favor orderly, sequential thinking. We have been measuring based on our own cognitive architecture, not theirs." Krell decided to conduct additional interviews. He requested permission to speak with Emma's family and teachers, individuals who could provide context about her background and development. Emma's parents were invited to the research station, along with her teacher, a woman named Catherine. Catherine was a human in her middle years with gray hair and kind eyes. She had been teaching children for over 20 years. When she met with Krell and examined the test results Emma had achieved, she was not surprised. "Emma has always been like this," Catherine explained, sitting in the observation room while Krell reviewed her statements. "She does not always follow the rules that we teach. When I explain a concept using a specific method, Emma often arrives at the solution using a completely different approach. Sometimes her methods are actually more efficient than what the textbooks recommend." "Do you consider her exceptional among human children?" Krell asked. "Yes and no," Catherine said thoughtfully. "She is unusually gifted in certain areas. But humans are interesting because we have many different types of intelligence. Some of my students are systematic thinkers like computers. They follow rules perfectly but sometimes struggle with novel situations. Other students like Emma see sideways. They make connections that do not follow conventional logic. They struggle sometimes with routine tasks but excel when creative thinking is required." Krell felt something shift in his understanding. "You are suggesting that human cognitive architecture includes multiple, complementary thinking styles?" "Exactly," Catherine said, nodding. "We have always known this, at least in our educational systems. Different people think differently. Some are naturally logical. Some are naturally creative. Some are naturally practical. Most people are combinations of these. The archive seems to have missed this diversity in your classifications." Emma's mother, a woman named Rachel, added her own observations. "Emma has always solved problems in unusual ways," Rachel said. "When she was very small, she would skip steps that other children needed. She would arrive at correct answers but sometimes could not explain how she got there. Teachers thought something was wrong with her. I knew something was different but not wrong." Krell conducted extensive interviews with all three family members. He asked detailed questions about Emma's childhood, her development, her learning patterns, and her personality. He examined educational records and psychological evaluations. What emerged was a clear picture of a human child who possessed naturally high capability in intuitive reasoning and pattern recognition, combined with the ability to articulate her thinking when asked to do so. By the end of the third day of investigation, Krell had formulated a new hypothesis. Humans were not limited by their cognitive architecture. Rather, they possessed a fundamentally different type of cognitive architecture that the Galactic Archive had failed to recognize or properly value. This architecture included simultaneous processing of intuitive and logical information. It included the capacity for intuitive leaps that did not require step-by-step justification. It included creative problem-solving approaches that could complement more orderly thinking styles. Humans had never been inferior. They had simply been misunderstood and misevaluated. Krell wrote a preliminary report documenting his findings. His conclusion was direct and challenging to centuries of accumulated classification. The Galactic Archive needed to completely reassess how it understood human cognition and human potential. When Holt read the report, he sat silently for a long time. "If you are correct," Holt finally said, "then everything we thought we knew about human limitations is wrong." "Yes," Krell agreed, his bands glowing a soft, thoughtful blue. "Everything we thought we knew is wrong." On the 7th day of the investigation, something extraordinary happened that would fundamentally change Professor Krell's understanding of not only human cognition but of his own species and limitations as well. Emma arrived at the research station carrying a small bag containing what she called her thinking snacks. Inside were cookies and a bottle of juice, items that seemed completely ordinary to the human child but which fascinated the alien researchers who had never consumed food before. Krell had prepared his most challenging puzzle yet. It was a theoretical framework that he himself had been developing for 6 months. The problem involved harmonic resonance patterns across dimensional boundaries, a concept that existed at the very edge of known theoretical physics. Even Krell, with his centuries of advanced education and his position as one of the foremost researchers in his field, had not yet achieved a complete solution. The problem was genuinely difficult, the kind of puzzle that only the most brilliant minds across the entire galaxy would even attempt. Emma sat down at the haptic interface with her bottle of juice beside her. She began eating cookies slowly while examining the problem displayed on the screen. Krell watched, uncertain what to expect. This puzzle was different from all the others. This was not a prepared test designed for assessment. This was a real problem, an actual unsolved question from the frontier of scientific knowledge. Emma worked quietly for approximately 19 minutes. During this time, she occasionally sipped her juice and ate pieces of cookies. She did not appear to be straining or struggling. Instead, she looked almost relaxed, as though solving theoretical physics problems while eating snacks was a perfectly normal activity for a 10-year-old human child. Then she pressed the completion button. The system began its analysis. This process took longer than with the other puzzles because the problem was more complex. After nearly 30 seconds, the interface displayed its results. Emma's solution was not only correct but it was innovative. She had approached the problem from an angle that Krell had never considered. She had made intuitive leaps that created shortcuts through the mathematical framework. Her solution was, in fact, more elegant and more efficient than any approach Krell had attempted over his 6 months of work. Krell felt something move through his crystalline structure, something almost like physical pain mixed with profound realization. His bioluminescent bands flashed through multiple colors rapidly, cycling so quickly that they appeared almost white with intensity. Emma turned to him and smiled. "That one was harder," she said, taking another bite of her cookie. "But it was interesting. I liked the way the dimensions connected together. It was like watching a dance or something." She had just described theoretical physics as though it were an artistic experience. She had solved a problem that had occupied Krell's entire intellectual focus for half a year. She had done it while eating cookies and drinking juice, without apparent effort or strain. "Emma," Krell said carefully, his voice quieter than usual, "how did you perceive this solution?" Emma thought about the question for a moment while chewing her cookie thoughtfully. "Well," she said, "I could see how the patterns wanted to fit together. Like, the harmonic resonance thing, it wasn't trying to be complicated. It was trying to be simple, but nobody was listening to it the right way. Once I found the way it wanted to be simple, everything else just fit." Krell sat down heavily on a nearby chair. Emma's description was not following any logical framework he could articulate. She was not describing mathematical reasoning or systematic analysis. She was describing intuitive understanding, as though the theoretical problem possessed intention or desire of its own. "The problem wanted to be simple?" Krell repeated, trying to understand. "Yeah," Emma said, offering him a cookie which he declined politely. "That's how I see things. Everything is trying to be simple and beautiful in some way. Complicated stuff usually means you're not seeing it right. When you see it the right way, it becomes simple and beautiful." Over the next hour, Krell asked Emma many questions about how she perceived problems, how she thought about solutions, and how she arrived at her answers so quickly. Emma did her best to articulate her thinking process, though she admitted several times that she found it difficult to explain something that felt so natural to her. "My mum says I see sideways," Emma explained. "She says that most people think in straight lines like following a path. But I think in all directions at the same time. So I can see where the path should go before I have to walk all the way through it." Krell found this description remarkably accurate as a metaphor for what he had observed. Emma did seem to perceive problems holistically, seeing the entire solution space simultaneously rather than progressing through it step by step. Later that day, Krell met with David, Emma's teacher, again. This time, Krell posed a specific question. In your experience teaching many human children, Krell said, do you believe that Emma's cognitive style is unique, or is it something that other humans share to some degree? David considered this carefully. I think many humans have this capability to some degree, he said. But it varies widely. Some humans are very systematic and logical. Some are very intuitive and creative. Most are somewhere in between. Emma is just at the high end of the intuitive scale. But the capability itself, the ability to make intuitive leaps and see patterns without step-by-step analysis, I think this is natural to all humans to varying degrees. This is not true for other species, Krell said. It was more of a statement than a question. No, David agreed. I have studied other species in the archive databases. Most seem to be primarily systematic thinkers. Humans are unusual because we naturally mix systematic and intuitive thinking. We're good at both, though not always equally good at both. That mixing is what makes humans creative. Krell felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of reality. For centuries, his species had assumed that intelligence could be measured on a single scale, that some species were simply more intelligent than others. But what if intelligence was not singular? What if different types of intelligence, different cognitive architectures, simply could not be compared on a single scale? What if humans were not less intelligent than advanced species, but differently intelligent? That evening, Krell sat alone in his private quarters, his bands glowing a soft, uncertain yellow. He thought about his 6 months of work on the harmonic resonance problem. He thought about how Emma had solved it in 19 minutes while eating cookies. He thought about all his years of education, all his accomplishments, all his professional achievements. And he realized that he had been measuring himself against the wrong standard. He had been optimizing for orderly, systematic thinking. He had never developed his intuitive capabilities. He had never learned to see sideways the way Emma saw sideways. His species had optimized for one type of cognitive excellence and in doing so, had become blind to another type entirely. Emma knocked gently on his door later that evening. Are you sad? She asked, noting his dimmed bioluminescent bands through the transparent panel. Krell was surprised by the question. Why do you ask? You look the way my dad looks when he's thinking about something that bothers him, Emma said simply. My mom always tells him that when you're really smart, sometimes you get stuck thinking only one way. She says that's when you need someone different to help you see sideways too. Krell looked at this small human child who had spent only 7 days in his presence but who had already begun to teach him things that centuries of education had never covered. Your mother is very wise, Krell said quietly. Yeah, Emma agreed. She says the smartest thing is knowing when you don't know something. And knowing that different people know different things. Krell's bands began to glow a warm orange color, something like hope mixed with humility. I believe I am beginning to understand what I do not know, Krell said. Thank you, Emma. Professor Krell's final report to the Galactic Archive was unprecedented in its scope and revolutionary in its implications. Over the course of 3 weeks, he had compiled his complete findings into a document that challenged the very foundation of how the archive classified and understood intelligence across all known species. The report was not merely a collection of observations about one exceptional human child. It was a comprehensive reassessment of human cognitive capabilities and a fundamental critique of the archive's entire species classification system. Krell did not submit his report quietly or through standard channels. Instead, he requested a formal hearing before the Archive's Council of Intelligence Assessment, the governing body responsible for classifying all known species according to cognitive ability. Holt supported him fully, adding his own observations and findings to the presentation. The two researchers prepared extensively, knowing that what they were about to propose would face significant resistance from the scientific establishment. The day of the presentation arrived. Krell stood before the council, his crystalline body reflecting the formal lighting of the great chamber. Behind him, displayed on massive screens, were neural scans, test results, video recordings, and detailed analyses of Emma's cognitive performance. The council members, representatives from 7 different advanced species, watched with varying degrees of skepticism and interest. For centuries, Krell began, we have classified the human species as developing and moderately intelligent. Our measurements have suggested that humans possess average processing speed, limited memory capacity, and primarily sequential cognitive architecture. However, these measurements are fundamentally flawed because they are based on criteria that favor our own cognitive styles. Krell then presented evidence of Emma's extraordinary abilities. He showed the puzzles she had solved in seconds that should have required hours. He displayed the neural scans demonstrating her simultaneous activation of multiple cognitive regions. He presented the theoretical framework she had solved, the problem that had occupied his own research focus for 6 months. But more importantly, Krell continued, Emma is not unique. She is exceptional, yes, but not unique. The archive's own databases contain records of approximately 200 documented cases of humans displaying similar cognitive patterns throughout our history of contact with this species. We have been observing these individuals and classifying them as anomalies, when in fact they represent a natural variation within human cognitive architecture. Krell then presented his most controversial finding. Humans do not possess a single, linear cognitive architecture as we have assumed. Instead, humans naturally combine systematic and intuitive thinking processes. They integrate logical analysis with creative intuition in ways that most other species do not naturally achieve. This integration is not a limitation. It is an architectural advantage. A council member from the Alterian species, a being named Vex who had served on the council for 200 years, raised a critical question. If humans possess this advantage, why have they not achieved technological or scientific dominance across their region of space? Because, Krell replied carefully, they have not had access to the resources and cumulative knowledge that we possess. They are developing species not because of cognitive limitations but because of technological and historical circumstances. Given equivalent resources and time, I believe human cognitive diversity could become one of the most valuable assets in the galaxy. The Council debated Krell's report extensively. Some members rejected his conclusions outright, arguing that his sample size was too small and his interpretations were biased by his direct contact with Emma. Others found his evidence compelling but remained uncertain about the implications. After 2 full days of discussion and analysis, the Council reached a decision. The human species would be reclassified. They would no longer be listed as developing. Instead, they would be classified as possessing fundamentally different cognitive architecture, with particular strengths in adaptive thinking, creative problem-solving, and intuitive reasoning. The archive would begin actively recruiting human researchers and scientists for collaborative projects. News of this decision rippled through scientific communities across 17 different star sectors. Within 2 years, human researchers were invited to participate in collaborative studies on problems that had stalled for centuries. A human mathematician named Oliver worked with an Alterian colleague to break through a theoretical barrier in probability theory that had blocked progress for over 300 years. A human engineer named Sophie collaborated with researchers from 3 different species to design a more efficient dimensional bridge, a technology that had practical applications across the entire galactic community. Within 5 years, human Alterian research teams had produced breakthrough innovations in quantum mechanics. Human-Krell partnerships had revolutionized approaches to dimensional mathematics. Human scientists were no longer assistants or students. They were recognized as equal contributors to the frontier of galactic knowledge. Emma herself never became a famous scientist or research pioneer. She easily could have pursued such a path. Universities and research institutions across the galaxy extended invitations to her. Prestigious academies offered full scholarships. The most advanced civilizations competed for the opportunity to recruit her into their research programs. But Emma chose a different path. When she was 17 years old, she decided to become a teacher, just like Catherine had been her teacher. She wanted to help other humans develop and access their own intuitive capabilities. She established an educational program focused on teaching children how to see sideways, how to trust their intuitive leaps, how to balance systematic thinking with creative thinking. Problem solving is not about being smarter than everyone else, Emma would tell her students. It is about being brave enough to think differently. It is about trusting that sometimes the answer comes to you in ways you cannot explain. It is about making connections that do not follow the rules but that work anyway. Her students came from all over the human world and eventually from other species as well. Emma's teaching methods proved remarkably effective. Young minds, freed from the pressure to think in only systematic ways, began developing their own intuitive capabilities. Many of her students went on to make significant contributions to science, mathematics, art, engineering, and countless other fields. Professor Krell visited Earth regularly after that initial contact. He and Emma remained friends across the decades. He watched her grow from a 10-year-old girl solving puzzles in a research station to a young woman teaching others to think sideways. He observed how her intuitive approach to education created environments where both systematic and creative thinkers could flourish together. Years passed. Emma eventually grew old, just as all living things do. When she was 87 years old, she lay in a comfortable medical facility surrounded by people she loved. Krell sat beside her bed, his crystalline body now showing signs of age, his bands glowing with a soft, warm light. "Did we teach you anything?" Emma asked, her voice soft but still carrying the same curious energy that had characterized her as a child. "Everything," Krell replied without hesitation. "You taught me that intelligence is not about being faster or more precise. It is about being brave enough to think sideways. You taught my entire species that diversity of thought is not a weakness to overcome. It is a strength to celebrate." Emma smiled. "My mom always said that the smartest thing is knowing when you don't know something. And knowing that different people know different things. I think you finally understood that." "Yes," Krell said, his bands glowing a warm, golden orange. "I finally understood." Emma's influence on galactic civilization extended far beyond what she ever intended. Decades after her death, educational systems across multiple species began incorporating methods based on her teachings. Research institutions started actively recruiting not for highest processing speed or most orderly thinking, but for diversity of cognitive style. Teams became intentionally mixed, including both systematic and intuitive thinkers, recognizing that their complementary approaches produced better solutions than either style alone. The transformation was not quick or complete. Many institutions resisted change. Many researchers clung to old assumptions about intelligence and capability. But slowly, gradually, the understanding spread. Intelligence was not singular. Different was not inferior. Sometimes the most brilliant solution came from someone brave enough to think sideways. In the end, Emma's greatest legacy was not a scientific discovery or a mathematical theorem. It was the simple but profound realization that in a galaxy full of orderly, systematic minds, the most valuable thing one human child could offer was permission to see differently, think differently, and trust that different was not wrong. It was just different. And different, it turned out, changed everything.